Business owners of Reddit, what's the most obnoxious reason an employee quit had to be fired over? We had a young intern helping with some hardware inventory tasks. It wasn't uncommon for laptops not to make it back to us as projects would hoard them from terminated employees, but one day we noticed his backpack open and a laptop of a model we used sticking out. Sent him to the other side of the building and checked the serial number, and yep, it was one he reported as missing during a recent inventory. Opportunistic theft is one thing, but bringing it back into the office every day, just wow. Opportunistic theft made me think of this real dumb kid. I worked at a electronics store that rhymes with blessed high. On our old register system, a kid figured out that you could give discounts to a certain percent based on the item and price without a manager. So he started discounting things for his friends. You're probably thinking, oh, I'd love if a friend discounted a TV for me. Nope. That's not what he'd do. He'd do candy bars, PC games, movies. What he'd do is he'd search for discounts, and our point of sale recorded every change or attempt to change to a transaction. So what you'd see is bag of chips, those Fridays ones, $3.29 discount, 30% override required, cancelled, discount 25% accepted, discount 25% override required, cancelled, discount 20% accepted, discount 15% accepted, discount 10% accepted, discount 10% override required, cancelled. In the end, he'd end up giving people 40-70% off of whatever it was they were buying. But it was all stupid piddly shit. I think the largest discount he got around to was like $30. We still had to fire him. I had a subcontractor on a job for my company try and convince the client that they should dump me and go with their business, and they would undercut me by 10%. Learned this from the client, who asked me to find another person to service our contract. My parents got a quote on some plumbing work they needed once from a chain company, Roto-Rooter, I think, and they quoted some enormous fee in the high thousands. Then, individually, while one is talking to my mother and the other guy's talking to my father on a different area of the property, they each mentioned they run their own side business and could do the work for way less. I still wonder if they knew they were trying to undercut each other as well as trying to undercut their employer. My parents went with someone else. Employee had corporate card. Charged a vacation, purse, fossil watch, takeout, along with overall being miserable to work with. Had laptop stolen within weeks of joining. Fired her, and a few days later a watch catalog from Fossil showed up at the office with her name on it. Have active court cases for all the theft. Not a business owner, but at a previous job we had issues with food being stolen from the break room fridge. The company made a big stink about it and it kept happening, so they very obviously installed security cameras in the break room. Like big fucking cameras in plain sight, pointing at the fridge, with our bosses being very direct about there is the camera. You really want to lose your job over eating someone's sandwich? Few days later guy gets fired for stealing food. Literally on camera, just grabbing people's lunch out of the fridge and eating it. I used to do some consulting work and hired a woman to help out. Mostly clerical stuff and whatnot. I flew down to St. Thomas for a meeting and got a call from Sunitral at 1:30 PM. She had keys to my building but didn't know about the alarm. Basically, she and her boyfriend brought another couple down to have a foursome in one of my offices I had converted to a bedroom where I could crash if I worked late. So I called her. She answered mid-coitus and acted normal, albeit a little tipsy. I talked about a few mundane details I needed to relate to her anyways, and then mentioned to make sure she only was ever at the office between 700 am and 700 pm since there was a silent alarm that would call me with audio of activities in the building. When I got back in town her keys were sitting on my desk. Medical clinic. An employee told a patient he wants to know what she tastes like. Doesn't get much worse. Don't own a business but work on employee claims and lawsuits. I've told this story on here before. A guy filed a discrimination complaint against the company after he got fired for stealing hot dogs from the refrigerator. This warehouse, big company, this was not at my location, kept a stock of hot dogs for employee appreciation picnics, usually weekly cookouts. No one knew why they were disappearing, so announcements were made and all employees were asked to not eat the hot dogs, and if they wanted some they could ask but couldn't have several packs. That didn't work, so warnings were announced. Finally a camera was installed near the refrigerator and he got caught red-handed. He was just practically inhaling the hot dogs directly from refrigerator by the packs. After he was fired, he filed a discrimination claim on the basis of disability due to his weight. I sent the response with a video of him eating the hot dogs. Also, he couldn't prove his weight was a disability under the ADA and weight is not a protected class. We won that claim. We hired someone to do video photo media work. After a certain point he felt it was selling out and didn't want to do media commercially. He wanted to do business stuff. We asked him which role he would like. If he picked his role, we'd try it out. If he didn't, he would quit. He decided to quit. He couldn't come up with a role. My dad owned his own business working as a color corrector editor. He had this one employee who had been there since day one and ended up becoming similar to an assistant manager. My dad owned that company for 10+ years and, just recently, he had to fire the assistant manager because apparently he was telling employees and customers that my dad hates gays, people who aren't white, his kids, his whole family, that he's a terrible person, etc. Basically driving all business away, pushing my dad's company towards bankruptcy. Turns out he was a narcissistic sociopath. My dad's just sad his employees never trusted him enough to tell him about what this guy would say to them. My dad and I ran a business together cleaning out foreclosed homes for a real estate agency as I was finishing high school. I was a senior, so I got out at lunchtime and we could usually get a house done in a half day. Sometimes we'd get some bad ones and we had a few guys that we would call to see if they wanted to make a quick $100 for a day's work. On my literal last day of class my dad picked up one of our usual guys and got one house about 90% done by lunch. He was a pretty normal guy that we had never had any trouble with. The guy we paid to help my dad went out to the truck and came back into that house with a gun and robbed my dad of his wallet and took his keys and left in our truck. Funny thing is my dad only had the cash he was about to give him an hour later for finishing up the house. The state police got the guy's number from us and they told him some bogus story about how my dad was being investigated for not paying his workers and if met them with the truck they would get his statement and let him go. Idiot pulls up and gets arrested on the spot. He got 8 years in prison. Back when I had my translation business, I hired a guy to seek out contracts for me. I'd pay him 20% finder's fee. Instead of sending the finished project to a client, he accidentally sent naked pictures of himself. I learned of it when my client forwarded me the mail half an hour later, including the multiple glorious shots. I don't even. Had a guy on a location fake an injury. Now mind you, he did injure himself severely accidentally, but that wasn't his plan. His plan had been to fake a minor injury and get put on workers' comp. The problem was he screwed up how to do it and ended up hurting himself severely. You ask, how did you know he was trying to fake injure himself? Well, that's very easy to explain. We had a 20-minute tape of him hiding behind one of the trucks on the work site practicing his fall. Then a written confession from friends saying that he'd been planning it since the day we hired him. I used to own a bakery and a woman quit because she blamed her yeast infection on a bad batch of yeast I bought from China. I may be a guy, but I don't think that's how it works. I fired a guy because he said he couldn't come to work because it was raining and he had just washed his car the day before. Tool and die shop owner here. One of our machinists would go out for lunch and slam back 3-4 beers every day. When I found out, I told him he can't drink beer at lunch. He said it was his time and what he did at lunch was his business, not mine. The next day he came back from lunch smelling like beer. I let him go on the spot. A few years later he showed up in my office asking for his old job back. He said that he was an alcoholic back then and was sorry for his behavior. He was now sober and needed a job. I hired him on the spot and it worked out great for 5 or 6 years. Then he started drinking again and I had to let him go a second time. I have no idea how he is doing now, but I often wonder. He was a great machinist and a nice guy when he was sober. Not my business but my dad's. He hired predominantly people with criminal records and literally all they had to do was inspect rental cars for damage as the cars left the lot and keep their noses clean. You could do pretty much anything you wanted on your downtime with no complaints from my dad as long as he didn't get any complaints from the owners of the car lot. One day one of the supervisors for the car lot I worked for walks out and asks me for my dad's number. Supervisor had caught a guy stealing gas from the property. He even had security camera footage of it happening. Dude was instant fired.